The sitcom has always been a staple of American entertainment. They show the idiosyncrasies of American life. They've shown us characters we can relate to, as well as families that remind us of our own. One of the great pastimes of living in America today is watching reruns of classic sitcoms. We get a nostalgia of the good old days and perhaps our adolescence when we watch these shows. When we look at classic sitcoms, we do get the feeling that many of our favorites would never make it on air today. Let's look back at some of America's best sitcoms that probably wouldn't make it on air today. Amos and Andy. One of the first mainstream sitcoms to show black American characters at the forefront was Amos and Andy. It was based on a long-running radio series with the same name. The only difference is the radio sitcom featured two white actors, Charles Correll and Freeman Gostin, who impersonated two black men. In the 20s, this was rather commonplace on the radio, stage, and even film. But in the 50s, Amos and Andy became a TV sitcom. Correll and Gostin were replaced by two black actors. Alvin Childress played Amos, and Spencer Williams played Andy. Though the show did feature black actors, many critics felt the characters were stereotypical and degrading. The show faced its harshest criticism from the NAACP, who pressured the show to end. The show also lost a lot of its sponsors. Eventually, CBS canceled it in 1963. One seldom sees reruns of Amos and Andy these days. It's unlikely you'll find anyone who would enjoy the humor of the show or who could put up with the silliness of the two lead characters. But it's important to watch shows like Amos and Andy to understand our history, how we perceived each other, and to celebrate how much progress we've made. Hey, if you're enjoying this so far, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to Facts First if you haven't already. The Lone Ranger. One of the most popular Western shows of all time was The Lone Ranger. This show depicted the relationship between a cowboy and a Native American. It aimed to break barriers by showing how these characters put their differences aside to have a warm friendship. Unfortunately, the depiction of Native Americans wasn't always flattering. By today's standards, they'd be considered downright degrading. For example, the lead Native American character was named Tonto, which translates to fool. A film version of the show was made in 2013, starring Johnny Depp as Tonto. In this film, Tonto was more valiant and not the bumbling fool he was in the original. Depp wanted to make the film to right the wrongs of the past. Sadly, it was a flop, so it probably didn't make much of an impression. But like Amos and Andy, it's important to reflect on shows like The Lone Ranger to see how far we've come in understanding the diverse cultures and peoples who live within our country. F Troop. Another show similar to The Lone Ranger was F Troop. The show was also set in the Old West and had white actors playing Native Americans. Once again, the stereotypes of Native Americans in the show weren't flattering. Nevertheless, we can look back on a show like F Troop to show how previous Native American actors didn't have opportunities to play themselves on screen. It makes us appreciate how many more opportunities exist today. It also makes us appreciate films like Dances with Wolves, which featured actors like Floyd Westerman, a Native American actor playing a Native American character. The Honeymooners. One of the first sitcoms to show the husband and wife relationship and the trials and tribulations of the working class was The Honeymooners. This show may raise a few eyebrows today, as there are a few scenes throughout the series where Ralph, played by Jackie Gleason, threatens his wife whenever she irks him. One of his most famous gabs was, "One of these days, Alice, pow, straight to the moon." While by today's standards we wouldn't accept this kind of humor, it's unfair to chastise the whole show. Much of the comedy was lighthearted and sweet. It also showed us a slice of American life we seldom see. It's also credited for giving us some of the best catchphrases ever, including "Baby, you're the greatest," "One of these days," and of course, "Hamana, hamana, hamana." So maybe we should see more of The Honeymooners. There have been remakes across the world, film adaptations, and even a musical. But nothing can beat watching reruns. I Dream of Jeannie. This show was unique. The show revolved around an astronaut who finds a beautiful woman confined in a bottle. She eventually falls in love with him. But what might trouble sensitive audiences today is she refers to him as master and follows his wishes. That probably wouldn't fly today. But as with The Honeymooners, this great sitcom is more than just a few segments that seem outdated. It was a unique show and is one of the earliest examples of a great romantic comedy. All in the Family. If there's an American sitcom that can be described as groundbreaking, it's All in the Family. The show followed Archie Bunker, a working-class everyday American, and his family. It would feature his observations on life, politics, America, and the social issues of the day. He wasn't afraid to speak his mind and let off the occasional racial slur. But the show was all done in humor, and every group was mocked. It was made at a time when, as a culture, we could laugh at ourselves. We saw dark humor as a way to challenge the social ills of the day. All in the Family dealt with serious issues like abortion, homosexuality, war, unemployment, gun control, racism, and much more. But unfortunately, many All in the Family fans wonder if such a show could get produced today. Many of us wonder if even reruns might cause outrage among today's audiences. But if there's any show that should be rerun today, it's All in the Family. It's important to be able to tackle issues and laugh at ourselves at the same time. No one did this better than Archie Bunker. But he's not alone. There's another great TV dad who wasn't afraid to push boundaries. Married with Children. Ed O'Neill is known to newer generations for his role in Modern Family, but from the late 80s through late 90s, he was Al Bundy, the lead character in Married with Children. While not groundbreaking like All in the Family, it was a fun show that wasn't afraid to poke fun. It's almost as if the show was created as an antithesis to the rise of political correctness, which was nothing compared to what we have now. The show did ruffle a few feathers in its time. The biggest controversy happened when the anti-obscenity activist Terry Recolta boycotted the show. She was upset with an episode titled Her Cups Runneth Over. This episode included a scene of Al Bundy ogling a nude female mannequin. The boycott was slightly successful as many sponsors decided to cancel their commercials. Terry Recolta continued to express her displeasure at the show, appearing on talk shows and news channels. But her outrage didn't defeat the show. Eventually, many of the sponsors who withdrew their commercials returned to advertising during the show's breaks. Married with Children ran for another 8 years after the boycott. The Jeffersons. All in the Family had a cast of characters who spawned many great spin-offs. One was the Jeffersons. The show included many racial slurs and race-related jokes that might not fly today, but the show, like the Honeymooners, was also great, and it depicted married life. It was also one of the first shows to depict a wealthy black family. But it also taught us lessons which we don't see from many modern sitcoms. One of the most serious episodes occurred where George and his white neighbor Tom accidentally stumble into a KKK meeting. The KKK members try to insult and denigrate George, but of course he fights back. In one segment, the KKK leader faints and passes out. George, being the bigger man, performs CPR and saves his life. At the end of the episode, we see the son of this leader see the error of his father's ways. He decides to leave the KKK. Hogan's Heroes. This hit sitcom ran from 1965 to 71 and followed a group of Allied prisoners in a Nazi prisoner of war camp. The show was a hit and sensitively told the stories of our heroes who fought against the Nazis. But with today's sensitivities, we wonder if newer writers would have the cleverness and skill to set a comedy in such a dark setting.
Hey, welcome to Camp Freddy.
Sanford and Son. Based on the British sitcom Steptoe and Son, this 70s sitcom followed the owner of a junkyard, Fred G. Sanford, and his son Lamont. Fred Sanford was played by comedian Red Fox, who couldn't bring his blue humor to a TV show. Nevertheless, Sanford and Son wasn't afraid to be bold with its comedy. Many of its jokes involved race, sex, and homosexuality. There were even jokes about appearance. Remember Aunt Esther? Today we couldn't imagine someone as blunt as Fred Sanford on TV. But this was easily one of America's greatest sitcoms. Dukes of HAZZARD. This show followed troublemakers Luke Duke and Bo Duke as they got into trouble in rural Georgia. It's easily one of the most influential on American pop culture. For example, the high-waisted denim shorts worn by Daisy Duke are still known as Daisy Dukes today. So why wouldn't it air today? As the show was set in the South, there were prominent displays of the Confederate flag. In recent years, the flag has become so controversial that even a show that displays it becomes objectionable. MAUDE. Another spin-off to All in the Family was MAUDE. The character of MAUDE was played by Bea Arthur. She was the cousin of Edith Bunker, Archie's wife. Her character was liberal and shared many of the political and social views that are in vogue today. Nevertheless, the show did have the same dark humor that All in the Family had.
Trust me or just take off, eh?
Bosom Buddies. This was the show that launched Tom Hanks' career. It followed two men who disguised themselves as women to find housing with cheaper rent. It only lasted 2 seasons. Nevertheless, Tom Hanks fans might have to wait a while to see reruns. With today's constant discussion of gender and gender identity as a part of the culture wars, we predict there would be outrage towards a comedy where men pretend to be women. Baywatch. Who didn't love watching Baywatch? The show followed lifeguards and was the epitome of the excitements and laissez-faire attitude of the 90s, even though it premiered in 1989. There have been spin-offs from Baywatch, including films based on the show. It's a fun show to watch, though we can expect criticism that it objectifies women. 2.5 Men. This show only ended in 2015. While that may not seem like a long time ago, it seems that a lot has changed in our cultural sensitivities since then. People might not like Charlie's hedonistic lifestyle. As with Baywatch, one might feel the female characters were objectified. It was the most recent show that wasn't afraid to be bold and crass. Are you a fan of any of the sitcoms on this list? If not, we recommend you check some of them out. Do you want to see more bold sitcoms today? Or do you think sitcoms of today are better than what we had in the past? Let us know in the comments section below. And before you go, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to Facts First if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content.